everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome to the next installment of my Psy-Changeling recaps. In this video we're going to be talking about Ocean Light, which is book 2 in the Psy-Trinity series, or book 17 in the series overall. It is the very first book of the series where we spend the full book with the Black Sea Changelings, which are the ocean shifters, and I can't wait to talk about this book. If you're unfamiliar with the series, I've been recapping all of the books. I will leave the playlist linked on the screen above, as well as details down below. This book talk will be spoilery. It will probably be long, so get yourself a cup of tea or a drink and sit down and get comfy. I am going to spoil things that happen later in the book straight away at the top, just because of the nature of this particular style of video. To talk about Ocean Light is to talk about a lot of the history that has happened in books prior. While you could probably pick this book up and read it, there's a lot of things that this book rely on that have happened in previous books in order for you to understand particularly the hero of the story. So our hero is Bowen Knight, who is the security chief of the Human Alliance. The Psy-Changeling world is made up of 3 races. You have the humans, the changelings, and the Psy. Bowen is human. He is a descendant of the human who negotiated a peace treaty between the Psy and the changelings hundreds of years earlier. He takes his role as the security chief very, very seriously, and he has had altercations with the changelings in the past. He's done some things to repair that relationship, but he's very anti-Psy and has been for many years, because he and many other humans have had their minds attacked by Psy, because basically human shields, they don't really exist, and the Psy, if they want something, can just waltz in and take it without a care for the pain that it causes the humans. And so Bo has that in his past, and he's very wary of the Psy. He's had to start learning how to work with them, and he probably has a better relationship with the empaths in this world. In the original Psy-Changeling series, we found out that Bowen and many of the members of the Human Alliance had this chip implanted in their brain to protect them from psychic attacks. While the efficacy of the chip was really great, it prevented Psy from attacking human minds, the chip itself began to fail, and so Bo and many of his friends, the woman he considers his sister, they've all got a death sentence hanging over their heads because this chip is failing, and when it fails it will kill them. So that has been hanging over Bo's head for a number of books. In the previous book, Silver Silence, which I'll leave linked on the screen, Lily, who is Bowen's sister, was attacked and Bowen took a bullet for her. It hit him in the heart and he was close to death. They managed to keep him alive, and at the beginning of this book he has had his heart replaced with a mechanical heart to keep him alive. So all of that is in the lead up to this book. So Bo is the hero of the story and his heroine is Kaia. Kaia is a member of the Black Sea Changeling group. Her changeling form is kept a secret for the majority of the book, but obviously we're talking spoilers here. So she is a dolphin shifter and she comes from a very large family group, and her parents were killed when she was quite young, and as a result she has a really deep distrust of humans, because her mother was a medical worker who travelled around the world and was helping all sorts of groups, particularly humans who needed assistance in remote villages and towns. And when a town that they were working in was overtaken by a really quite deadly virus, her parents became sick, and rather than allowing the medication to be used to heal these changeling healers who were trying to help them, her parents were left untreated, and by the time Kaia got in contact with Black Sea to come and help, it was too late for her parents. So she has a really deep-seated mistrust of humans and hasn't set foot on land since she was a child. She's always lived in one of Black Sea's ocean cities or installations. So she's not a huge fan of Bo at the beginning of this story. So that's sort of the setup of the characters in the world and where they are at the beginning of this book. I'm going to go through the main plot of the story. I don't know if I'm going to separate the world facts, because this book, despite the fact that you probably need to read some of the other books to read it, is quite contained in the fact that it only takes place with the Black Sea Changelings and then mentions of Bo being in contact with his Human Alliance contacts. There's very little external conflict, it all is internal. However, the mystery complication does tie into previous books wherein Black Sea Changelings have been going missing, thought to have been taken by either Psy or the consortium group. I will still have my fun scenes thing at the end, because there are many things that I loved about this book. Before I jump into talking about the plot, I do want to mention a couple of content warnings in this book. It is Psy-Changeling, so you do have kidnapping, there's some fight scenes, there is an interrogation scene, and a few other bits and pieces that you would get in sort of a mystery thriller type story. But you also have one of the major supporting characters who is pregnant, and it is mentioned that she has had previous miscarriages and that her pregnancy is considered kind of high risk for her, because the character is quite concerned that she has had those miscarriages and all of her family around her are conscious of keeping her calm and occupied so that she doesn't carry that stress every single day. So be aware of that going into it, because I know that is a trigger for some people. I thought it came across as respectfully done, but I've also never been in that situation, so just putting it out there. We open in 2083. It's been about 2 months since Bowen was shot, and he's been in a medically induced coma ever since then. One of the last things that Bowen made his sister Lily promise him was that they would use his brain in order to find a way to stabilize the chip implant that the members of the Human Alliance had, so that even if he died, he could save their lives. Lily took this quite literally and made a deal with Black Sea, who were working on something that could possibly work. And so after they stabilized Bo and replaced his heart with a mechanical heart, they transferred him to a Black Sea installation where Dr. Adelina Kahanui is basically running a procedure to see if she can stabilize the chip. Bowen wakes up out of the medically induced coma that he's been in and meets the 2 women in his room. One of them is Dr. Kahanui, who is the character who is pregnant, and she is the cousin of Kaia Luna. And Kaia is the station cook, but formerly she was Attie's research assistant. They both check his vitals, and there's some really interesting stuff around their medical research and how they've managed to maintain his muscle density, muscle tone and whatnot while he's been unconscious. But they also inform him that he is currently in a Black Sea installation called, I think, Raijin. I think that might be how you pronounce it. While they're talking, he asks how many Black Sea members have gone missing since he's been unconscious, because Bowen was part of the group who was trying to help track down the missing Black Sea members, and it was a Human Alliance member who found Layla in a previous book. And we find out that 3 changelings have gone missing since then, and Kaia is very deeply distrustful of Bowen. And part of this stems from the fact that one of her very good friends, Hugo, who has recently gone missing, had given her information that pointed to the Human Alliance being partly responsible for their disappearances. And there was information in this dossier on the fact that the Human Alliance had increasing numbers, that they had a paramilitary force, and that they were planning on building a shipping line that would travel through Black Sea territory. We find out a little bit about the experiment that Attie is running on Bowen, which takes place in 3 stages. By the time he wakes up, stage 1 has already been implemented, and they have a certain number of days to wait until they can attempt stage 2 and then finally stage 3. Attie is really happy with the progress, but does let him know that if they reach the stage 3 part of the experiment, that there is a 95% chance that he will end up with brain damage. Despite the fact that he's very nervous about this, he also knows that by continuing with this particular experiment, even if it doesn't work for him, it will give them enough research to maybe save the life of his sister and his best friends. We meet another one of the Black Sea Changelings, KJ, who is an orderly who works at the clinic on Raijin, and he's sent in to help supervise Bowen while he has a shower, and he tells a rather humorous story to take Bowen's mind off the fact that he's in pain and he's not able to move around as well as he has previously. We then sort of skip forward, and Bowen wakes up again in his room, but this time he's alone, and as he gets stressed, he realizes that his best friend Cassius in the Human Alliance has managed to smuggle him in a phone. And so he's able to call and contact Lily and Cassius and let them know that A, he's still alive, that the experiment is going ahead, and also to get information from them on how the Human Alliance is going. At this point, it's only Lily and Cassius who know that Black Sea have him. They arrange for him to be kidnapped by them, and the rest of the world thinks that he is still recovering from this gunshot wound. Bo goes out walking around the installation and realizes that he's in an underwater city, and he meets a whole bunch of different characters, and I'm actually going to go through and list some of the characters and what their changeling forms are later on, because I just think it's really interesting to keep track of that, because Black Sea is very different in the fact that they are not one changeling group, they are a group of very different changelings, their commonality being that they all live in the water. Bowen ends up finding Kaia in the kitchen. She's the station chef, and he also meets her pet Hex, the 7th, who is a little white mouse who lives in Kaia's apron, and she has been keeping mice since she was quite young. She talks to Bowen about how every different reiteration of Hex has been different and unique in their own way. We find out that about 400 to 600 people live on this Black Sea installation at any given point, and that's broken up into little habitats, so people just move around between them. While they're talking in the kitchen and Kaia is feeding Bowen, she asks him why he's so interested in having a friendship between the Human Alliance and Black Sea, because as I said, she's very reluctant and cautious around humans, and she doesn't necessarily believe that he has the changeling interests at heart. And of course, she believes that he's responsible for Hugo's disappearance. So she's trying to work him out. We find out a little bit about Kaia's family group from her internal thoughts. So she was raised by her aunt and uncle and her cousins. So Atty is the oldest of the Kahanui cousins, and Atty has 5 younger brothers, including a set of triplets. Kaia is also related to Malachi, who we met in previous books. He's the second to Mayan, who is the Black Sea Alpha. While they're talking in the kitchen, Kaia begins to realise that the dossier of information that Hugo had given her might possibly be skewed. And this is after they get into an argument over Black Sea numbers and Human Alliance numbers, and Kaia realises that actually the Black Sea Changelings outnumber the Human Alliance by an immense amount. And so Kaia ends up ending the argument that they get into, and Bo kisses her in the kitchen. After this, they kind of act like it hasn't happened, and then Bo goes back in for more scans with Atty. And Bo meets George for the first time. George is Atty's new research assistant and is kind of a loner on the station. And after his argument with Kaia, Bo gets back in contact with the Human Alliance and tries to figure out if there's some truth in what she was saying. So she claimed that Hugo had said that the Human Alliance ships were crossing over into Black Sea territory. He has Lily and Cassius begin to dig into their shipping fleet to find out if there's any truth in that. He doesn't want it to be true because one of his best friends, Hanali, is the fleet commander, and he doesn't want to believe that she could be responsible for any of this. As Lily and Cassius begin to dig deeper, they begin to see that maybe Hanali might be involved, which is really heartbreaking for Bowen. Atty begins to realise that Kaia has a strong attraction to Bowen, and while she's happy for her cousin, she also reminds her that there's really no guarantee that Bowen will be the same in two weeks from the time that they have this conversation, which is something that Kaia's very cautious about in terms of progressing the relationship. Bowen's then in contact with Malachi, or I'm going to call him Mal for the rest of the book because that's pretty much what everyone else calls him, around the shipping line allegations. And Malachi had already known about them, which upsets Bowen because Bowen didn't know about them. And so Bowen gets back in contact with Cassius and they begin to investigate this in more depth, especially since only the core members of the Human Alliance groups, known as the Knights, knew about the shipping line. So someone has leaked the information to the Changelings. There's a really funny scene the next time that Bowen is in the common room dining area. He's sitting down and talking with Carlotta, who is a grandmother on this installation. She's also a whale. And Kaia comes into the room and Bowen accidentally doesn't realize that he's doing it. Wolf whistles her, which sets off all of the other changelings, who thinks it's hilarious, but she's baked him a pie. And so she comes over and she basically refuses to give him pie. It's like, no pie for you. But while Kaia is out of the room, another member of Black Sea who was very close with Hugo ends up attacking Bowen. Now, Eldon, the guy who attacked Bowen, is a walrus, and they are known for very short tempers. Bowen ends up putting Eldon on his back, which is a first because basically walruses are kind of almost unstoppable, really, because they're just big and unstoppable. However, Bowen ends up with a cut lip from the altercation, and because everyone is really concerned about Atty and her pregnancy and not causing her stress, and Atty is concerned that Bo doesn't get injured because of the experiment, Kaia then decides to hide Bowen from Atty until she can figure out the cut lip and they can come up with a cover story, because if Atty knew that Bowen had been in a fight and could potentially have compromised the experiment, it would cause her stress. So they end up in Kaia's room where she tends to his lip. They come up with a cover story and eventually he leaves because she has plans to go out for lunch with her 2 best friends, Serafina and Tansy. Serafina is second in charge of Ryan behind Dex, who is Atty's partner. And I can't remember if we actually get Serafina and Tansy's changeling forms, but Dex is a great white shark. While she's having lunch with her 2 best friends, she admits to kissing Bowen, which they all find very funny. And later when Kaia returns to the habitat, she finds out that Bowen wants to do some exercise, and so she offers to take him to the internal swimming pool that they have, which is sort of like a naturally created pool of seawater that they have within the station. They have this really fun scene where they're swimming in the water, and Kaia doesn't shift at this stage, but when she's in the water she develops gills, and it's noted that this is something that most sea changelings can do, is even if they're swimming in their human form, they develop the ability to breathe underwater. By this stage, Bowen's worked out that what he feels for Kaia isn't just simple lust. There's something about her that he is drawn to. She knows the same thing, obviously, but hasn't talked about the mating bond or anything like that. But they're both very aware that at the moment he has a potential expiration date, and it makes it hard for them to pursue anything in any depth. That said, Bo really wants to do that. Soon after that, Bowen goes through stage 2 of Addie's experiment, and it all looks good. They've basically implanted something into his brain that will hopefully stabilize and freeze the chip in place so that no further degradation occurs. And Bowen begins to plan a romantic night out for Kaia, and he begins to enlist help of the changelings that he's met so far on the station in order to do that. Being changelings, they're all too eager to get involved and to help him out. Cassius and Lily end up contacting Bowen and letting him know that there are some irregularities in the fleet data, and it looks like Hanali is the one who is responsible for it. Malachi then arrives on station and confirms that Alliance ships have in the past taken changelings, and he has photographic evidence of that. While Malachi doesn't believe that Bowen is involved, Bowen promises to clean his house, and Bowen promises to find out exactly who is behind it. We also find out that Hugo had hacked the data from somewhere in Lantia, and that was how he had this information. We then cut to the romantic night out, and Bowen has planned for Kaia to have a beautiful dress and makeup and everything to get prepared. She's sort of sent to a location in Rayin by one of her friends, and there she finds everything ready for her to get dressed, and then she finds a note and ends up finding Bowen, who is dressed very formally as well, and they have a candlelit dinner in a section of the station that is not currently being used, and it's all very beautiful and romantic. And then Kaia reveals to Bowen that she has Psy ancestry and that she is also telepathic. And taken off guard, Bo reacts really badly to this because he has such traumatic memories of being attacked by Psy himself when he was quite young, and he says some things that he probably shouldn't. He hurts Kaia's feelings, and he's really cross with himself for reacting the way that he did afterwards. Then he also finds out that Hanali has disappeared. Apparently she has gone trying to track down an ex-boyfriend of hers that she hasn't seen in a while, and they can't find her anywhere. And Bowen tries to learn a little bit more about Hugo because he's realized that this close friendship that Kaia has is also hanging over their relationship. And he also gets told off by Bibi, who is Kaia's grandmother. She's a sea turtle, and she basically tells Bowen what's what and that he needs to get his head out of his butt. Bowen eventually goes to find Kaia and apologizes for his reaction and for the way that he treated her, and he reveals that when he was 13 years old, I think it was, his mind was cracked by a telepath, and that event left him quite traumatized for a long time, and that eventually he killed that Psy in retaliation. And that's why he reacts quite badly to surprises like being told that Kaia is a telepath. He realizes that Kaia would never actually intentionally invade his mind, and in fact he makes a comment earlier on, it's interesting that she has survived outside of the Psynet, because he knows that Psy need that psychic feedback that comes from being connected to a large group of their people. And we find out later on that she had that via a connection to someone else in the Changeling group who also has Psy ancestry, and so they had this little mini feedback loop, plus the connection to all of the changelings was enough to sustain her. And that as a result of living amongst the changelings, she had to naturally develop her own shields. Changelings themselves are very difficult for telepaths to read in general, and so she almost did it defensively because of of the group of people that she was around, and she wasn't around too many humans, so she didn't have that same telepathic interference that someone, say like Silver, did, where she could hear everyone. Kaia then tells Bowen about where her mistrust from humans came from, about the fact that her parents were denied medication while they were ill while helping humans, and they eventually died as a result of that. We, the readers, find out that as a result of that, Kaia actually hasn't set foot on land since she was 7 years old, and she has a deep phobia of being on land. Bowen is then warned that Mal and Kaia's cousins will possibly have something to say about his relationship with her, and then 5 days later he meets those cousins. So then you meet Edison and Armand, and then Kaizo, Tavesi and Tazi, who are the triplets, and they come down to meet and assess Bowen, and he stands up to them and they become good friends, and everyone's really surprised that when he walks in surrounded by them. The cousins are really fantastic. I hope they get some books because they were really fun. We see that Bowen is starting to experience some pain as a result of the chip in his head and the experimentation process that he's going through. Bowen is suspicious of Kaia's form, and when her cousins leave, he tries to run after them to see if he can see what they shift into, but he misses them. And he has his suspicions at this point. Cassius and Lily are then able to confirm that Hanali was the one who ordered the fleet captains to cross over into Black Sea territory, so basically putting the nail in the coffin of her guilt in that sense. Bowen ends up speaking to his parents for the first time since he's been shot, because as Kaia tells him, she would give anything to speak to her parents one more time, and he wasn't planning on doing it, knowing that he's got 3 or 4 days left before he could possibly be brain damaged for the rest of his life. So he ends up contacting them and speaking to them, and then after that, someone destroys one of Attie's experiments. So Attie was doing research with Tansy. Tansy, who is one of Kaia's best friends, works in sort of the garden area of the habitat, and she and Attie were experimenting with plant compounds and the ways that they could be used to treat medical conditions that were untreatable. All of their research is destroyed, and they don't want Attie to know this yet. So Tansy contacts Kaia and Bo goes with her, and then Bowen gets in contact with Malachi and asks for what their security procedures are on Ryun. And because they've basically got no crime down there, there's no security force on the station, but there is a security booth that is hidden from the general population, and Mal gives Bowen information on how to access that so they can try and track down who was the last person in that area. And the major suspect is George, who is Addie's research assistant. While everyone is investigating the destruction of the experiment in the agriculture area, George ends up getting into Addie's research lab and steals all the rest of Bowen's treatment 3 days out from when Bowen needs to go into the 3rd stage, and the timing is really critical. And then George leaves. Mal authorizes Bowen and Kaia to go after George, and we know that George is some kind of changeling with tentacles, so either octopus or squid. I don't particularly know which one it is. I don't think it's specified. Kaia and Bowen go up to the surface to Lantia, which is another of Black Sea's sea cities, and there he meets Geraldine Reese, who is Malachi's mother and also Kaia's aunt, who is the commander of Lantia. George turns up in Dark River territory, and so they contact the Dark River Changelings to keep an eye on him, and then they plan to head to San Francisco to track him down. And this is where Kaia's phobia of being on land really comes into play. She has to self-medicate in order to be on land, and so she's been given medication to help her stay calm, but she's been warned that it really won't last longer than a day. I think they travel by boat and by plane, and they eventually end up in San Francisco, and while they're waiting to get onto their plane, Bo realizes there's a changeling there. He doesn't know who the changeling is. We know that it's Kit. So Kit, who at the end of Allegiance of Honor went on a bit of a sabbatical and went traveling. This is the first time that he pops up in this setting. It's sort of a blink and you'll miss it scene. When they hit Black River territory though, they're met by Mercy, who is their escort through Dark River territory, and she's very wary of Bowen because of what he'd done the last time he was in Dark River territory. But Bowen does report the sighting of Kit to Mercy, and Mercy recognizes who it is when he gives the description, and she's really relieved to know that he's okay. Mercy travels with them through Dark River territory until they hit Snowdancer territory, and there they're met by Hawk, who lets them know that they have kept tabs on George, and George was staying down the road with a group of Snowdancer pack members who were not changelings, and gives them the direction so that they can go and talk to him. When they find him, he's sort of sitting on literally sitting on the edge of a cliff with all of the research medication. Kaia tries to talk him down, and then George attempts to jump off the cliff and commit suicide, but Bowen ends up dragging him back, and every time that he tries to shift, either Kaia or Bowen are able to order him out of the shift. And we realize that George has a very sort of tragic past. As a child, his parents were killed and he was taken in by an uncle who beat him quite severely, and he blames Black Sea for not interfering. At the time when George was quite young, there were different leaders of Black Sea and they were not as cohesive as they are now. That's something that my aunt has brought in since she became Alpha. And as a result, George has sort of this deep-seated anger towards his clan, and he's always been an outsider. He's never been able to develop strong, close friendships with other people, and he's been the loner. And so when the consortium contacted him and asked for information, he was able to then give it. But what he realized was that there is another Black Sea informant because he ended up with the wrong payment. He was sending them information about some of their experimental trials. He thought he was just talking to a pharmaceutical company, not the consortium. But he realized the truth when he got the wrong payment and realized that someone else had been giving them information about where the Psy-Changelings were. And he knew that he had to get out of Black Sea. Bowen and Kaia end up getting George back to Lantia, and they're sort of in this race against time because they've only got a few hours until Bowen needs to go through his last treatment and they need to get back down to the bottom of the ocean. Mal promises to take Bowen down there, and what we find out is that Mal is something really strong and really fast in the water, and he's able to actually pull a specially designed submersible down to the bottom of the ocean really quite quickly, but we still don't know what he is. I have my theories though. I might talk about them at the end if I remember. Before they go back down to Ryun, on Lantia they're met by Ivy, who has been brought in by Basic to talk to George. Being an empath, Ivy is able to calm George down, and Ivy and Kaia sit with George and have a chat to him, and then Mayan also comes over and talks to George. And the whole time Mal and Mayan have also talked about how their changeling family belong to them. Even when they do the wrong thing, they need to be taken care of by family, because the Psy-Changelings don't typically have many members of each animal group. And they also realise that Black Sea had failed George, and so they want to help him, which is a really nice show of compassion, because in some of the other changeling packs he would have just been killed outright. As Bowen and Kaia travel back down to Ryun so that Bowen can complete his final surgery, he asks her to promise to walk away from him if anything goes wrong, and she does the complete opposite, and she accepts the mating bond which connects them in place. And then Bo has his final surgery and he wakes up and it has been a success. He doesn't appear to have suffered any brain damage, and the chip has stabilized and it should now be inert in his brain, which is great because Atty can then now replicate this experiment and procedure and treat the rest of the human alliance. As she finalizes all of Bowen's treatments, Addie goes into labor, so Dex comes to take her and she goes off to have her baby. Bowen also has to leave Ryun to go and deal with the things that are going on with the human alliance. And Kaia tells him that he needs to go and sort this out. And so he leaves, and obviously this is hard on both of them because they've accepted the mating bond. And it's Bibi who tells Kaia that she either has to fight for the relationship, which means that she has to learn how to spend some of the time on land with Bowen, or the alternative for her is to curl up and die because she can't see her mate. And I love Bibi because Bibi gives the best advice, because I think they say she's over 200 years old, and she just tells it like it is. Kaia and Mal end up going to meet Bo in Venice, and there they track down Hanali and her boyfriend in a hotel room, and it's revealed Hanali's boyfriend Trey is actually Hugo, the Hugo who went missing at the start of the book. And Hugo has been dosed with some kind of poison and is dying, and he's able to point to KJ, who is the Black Sea orderly who is responsible for leaking information about the location of changelings so that they could be kidnapped by members of the consortium. After he gives this information, Hugo ends up dying, and Kaia ends up having a panic attack because the last time she was on land and someone died, it was her parents, and that's what caused her phobia of being on land. And she tells Bowen that just looking at him reminds her that he's on land and they can't be together, and so she leaves, which is devastating for both of them. By the time Kaia gets back to Lantia, Bibi is waiting for her and she takes her out to her island. So Bibi has this little island where she goes. While they're there, they swim and eat, and then Bibi gives Kaia some tough love and tells her she needs to figure out a way to spend time on land with her mate. We find out that KJ has disappeared. He went out on a yacht with his human wife, Liz, and then he abandoned her. He leaped into the water and didn't return, and Liz is beside herself by this. Kaia eventually returns to Venice after Bibi's advice, and that scene was great. The tough love scene is one of my favourite scenes in the whole book because Bibi just challenges Kaia's understanding of her relationship with Bowen. Kaia comes to the conclusion on her own that she needs to figure out a way to deal with her trauma and her phobia so that she can be with the person that she loves. So she goes back to Venice, and Bowen meets her for the first time in her changeling form, and she is a dolphin shifter, which explains the huge family and the cheerful, playful nature that they all have. And she tells him that she's returned to claim him and that she's determined to find a way to make it work. They spend the day and the night together, and Kaia is finally able to cry over Hugo and be comforted by Bowen. And she also vows that she's going to make Hanali her friend. Hanali has been cleared of the majority of the wrongdoing. She incidentally gave Hugo some information that he needed, but it was in fact KJ who was behind the majority of it. Kaia decides that Hanali needs her as a friend because they were both the two people who knew Hugo the best. Kaia decides to swim back to land here, and on her way there she's kidnapped and Bowen and Mal can't find her, and eventually Bowen calls in Caleb and offers him an unlimited favour in order for helping him track down where Kaia has gone. And most of the teleporters can't get a lock on Kaia because something has happened to her face. So anytime someone's face is disfigured or changed significantly from their normal face, teleporters who can teleport to people usually can't get a lock. But Kaia happened to have a distinguishing feature, which was something on her lower toe. She ended up losing her toenail, and so she had a tattoo there. And it's distinct enough that Caleb is able to get a lock on her, and he takes Bowen there. They take her out, take her back to Lantier, and then Mayan orders Bowen and Mal to go and get the kidnappers and bring them back to Lantier for interrogation. So Caleb takes them both over there. They overpower the people on the boat, and Caleb teleports the freaking boat back to Lantier, because of course he does. Mal and Bowen then interrogate the kidnappers, and they find out a little bit more information about the consortium and KJ and everything else that has gone on. Bowen points out that if anyone was to check the location of the boat that Kaia was on, they would see it was near Lantier, so they need to get it away. And so Mal and some of the other Black Sea shifters tug this boat out further, and eventually it's blown up when someone realizes that it's not where it's supposed to be. At this point, they don't find KJ, which to me suggests that that's an ongoing plot that will happen, and hopefully we'll get another Changeling book where we are investigating where he's disappeared to. But Kaia has decided that she wants to try and live in Venice with Bo, and so they have a house that's half above ground and partially below ground in the water so that Kaia and her family can come and go easily. And pretty much everyone comes to help them move in, including Mal and Mayan. As a result of how they were able to track down Kaia, all Black Sea members are in the process of having small, very easily distinguishable tattoos hidden somewhere on their body that in hard to see places, so that if something happens to them, teleporters will be able to get a lock on them. And it starts with Mal, and they're made up of random characters and numbers from various languages to make them really distinct. And the very last scene is Caleb and Sahara visiting Bo and Kaia in their home, and they're there because Sahara has basically told Caleb he is not allowed to hold this favour over Bowen's head because Bowen was trying to save the woman that he loved. We love Sahara. She always keeps Caleb on his toes. Caleb tells Bowen that he's renegotiating. Bowen doesn't want to renege on the deal. He doesn't want, because he wants to stick to it. However, Caleb says rather than an open-ended favour that can be used for anything, he will ask Bowen for a personal favour that has nothing to do with the consortium, the Psy, or anything like that, if and when he needs it, which both Sahara and Kaia agree is a pretty good deal. It also means that Caleb can't use Bowen for nefarious purposes, which he openly admits he would have. And that's where the book ends. I really love this one. It was a lot of fun. My world things are mostly going to be the changelings that we met. So we meet Philippe and Carlotta, who are humpback whales. And Philippe is also the station handyman. We met Alden, who was the walrus, and he's an engineer. We meet two of the juveniles, or I think they call them minnows, in this group, and we find out that the station has about 30 children of workers who live on station. Of them we meet Bodhi, who is a 10-year-old, and Scott, who is a teen, and I don't think we find out what they are, although Scott tries to convince Bowen that he is a shark, but Carlotta, who is his grandmother, tells him to stop lying and to be proud of who he actually is. We meet Oleana, who is an octopus. There is a family called the Ushijimas, who are Medusozoa, who are jellyfish. George is obviously a octopus or a squid of some description. Laurie Beth is a guppy. Dex, the station commander and Addie's mate, is a great white shark. BB is a sea turtle who is over 200 years old. I can't remember if we find out what KJ's Changeling form is, but he's married to a human, and Liz is a solo round-the-world sailor. We don't find out what Malachi and Mayan are. Mayan is definitely some kind of shark. My theory is that Malachi is either a swordfish, because they're the strongest, fastest fish in the ocean apparently. I did some research. Or something like a killer whale, but he could also be something else. And I don't know. In terms of fun things in the story, that when Bowen first begins to wake up, he doesn't know where he is. His eyes are covered and he thinks he's thinking in his head, but everything that he's thinking in his head, he's saying out loud. And this is like in the first chapter or two. And so Kaia is hearing everything. And every time he thinks something, she speaks back to him, and he's wondering why she's speaking back to him and why she can hear his thoughts. Later on, we probably realize that this is because she is a telepath and he's probably projecting what he's thinking. But the whole scene was just funny because he thinks all these weird thoughts and she just answers him. Another thing that I really liked about this book is that there is food references everywhere. Obviously, Kaia is a cook, so she just talks about food, and there are cookies everywhere. She loves baking cookies. Everyone on the station loves cookies. I was really hungry reading this book, I won't lie. Something I found really interesting, I suppose this is a world building thing, but I found it really interesting, is that water changelings don't have the same sort of dominant submissive hierarchy as the rest of the changeling groups appear to have, because they're so different. Mayan is alpha, but they don't call her an alpha, they just acknowledge her as their leader. So their hierarchy is slightly different, which I really like. I loved the romantic dinner sequence that Bowen planned for Kaia, because you could just tell he spent so much time thinking about it and asking all of these people to help him, and they could see that he was putting in the effort, so they did help him out, and I loved that. Hex is one of my favorite characters. There's so many gorgeous little scenes of this mouse running around doing all sorts of things, and he just spends time with Kaia and with Bowen, and he's very smart and he knows where his house is and he knows where his play area is. Like, I'm not a huge fan of mice personally, but I really liked Hex in this. Another scene when they're being escorted by Mercy and Bowen asks how the pup cubs are doing and congratulates her on their birth. She lets them know that Riley is currently in charge of the pup cubs and that they're just inundated with visits from everyone from both packs, and that the other day there was a pack of wolves in their wolf form sitting outside the house howling lullabies to the pup cubs, who loved it. I love the Snow Dancer clan. And then the final thing that I wanted to mention in my fun things is that in the last scene where we see Mayan, she comes out of her shift wearing Malachi's t-shirt, which the whole way through it's been hinted at that there's something between Malachi and Mayan. I know that I have said I am ride or die for Anthony and Nikita's book, but if there is one couple that tops them in my I want to read this right now, it's Malachi and Mayan. I really, really want their book, and I really want to know what they shift into. I'll settle for their book because that was great. So that is Ocean Light. I really enjoyed this. I know for a fact I enjoyed this more on reread than I did the first time that I read it. It was just so much fun. I would love to know if you've read this book. Feel free to chat to me about it in the comments. As always, if you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, feel free to leave a dolphin emoji. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.